This is Bert and Toby. We wanted to invite Larry onto the show. Let me introduce you to one of Australia's most accomplished fighters, martial artists and coaches, and an overall great human being, Larry Papadopoulos. Larry Papadopoulos, welcome, Larry. How are you, mate?
Very good, thank you, Toby.
Now, you've represented Australia in MMA, wrestling, BJJ, grappling, and coached many athletes for amateur and professional. Brent and I were talking earlier, and we wanted to know what inspired you to start your journey. What was the first thing that made you start with martial arts?
Oh, as a kid, the usual, watching things on TV. Geez, kung fu series, Bruce Lee, stuff like that. The usual story. And just by chance, I did judo when I was 10. I was lucky enough to find a really good jiu-jitsu coach that taught more of a traditional Japanese style when I was 15, and enjoyed it and continued doing it.
That's awesome. Can you talk us a little bit through like some of the different styles that you've trained from the start, like what you started, what you progressed through?
So started with judo, did jiu-jitsu since I was 15. I was very fortunate. I had a very open-minded coach, and his idea was I should try and do as many different things as I could. So he was never against me going to karate schools or kung fu schools or whatever it was. When I did go to uni, I started doing boxing and wrestling as well. I had an injury in judo competition, so I dislocated my knee and was hesitant to get back straight into judo, and that was actually where I got more into wrestling, especially Greco-Roman style, because it was less pressure, less leg attacks and stuff like that. And I was also doing Muay Thai at that time as well.
Hey, Larry, back on the jiu-jitsu, was that a start in, was that Japanese jiu-jitsu, or was it Brazilian jiu-jitsu?
I started with my first coach, Sensei, was Vince McCann, and he was a member of a group called the Australian Society of Jiu-Jitsuans. They're a jiu-jitsu body that goes back to 1906 in Australia. They've had roots. There was a Japanese jiu-jitsu exponent called Ruguru Fukushima who came to Australia in the early 1900s, 1906. He taught a lot of people in Australia that style of jiu-jitsu. It would have been more like judo back then. There was a lot of grappling then, but it was, we don't know what kind of traditional Japanese school it was. We kind of know, but the records were lost. And he taught a lot of people here in Australia. Quite interestingly, there's if you go to the archives of the old newspapers, you find a lot of references. We've got pictures of him. He had what we would call, they used to call all-in fights in Australia back then, taking on boxers, wrestlers, whatever. So he was kind of like the first mixed martial artist out of fighting in Australia, fighting all styles. It was quite common back there in the early 1900s.
That's amazing.
Basically, that's the legacy of where I came from. So he was quite a grappler, and he taught one specific guy called Len Noyes, who taught a lot of the coaches that I worked with. They worked with him firsthand. So it was a very strong grappling style. It still had all its hands-on self-defense, weapons and stuff like that. And that's where my jiu-jitsu came from. So I was very fortunate that I was from that school, not an ultra-traditional school, which would have been doing more katas, not a made-up school. There's a lot of made-up schools of jiu-jitsu, which is, I've done some karate, I've done some judo and aikido, and I'll put it together. It wasn't one of those either. So it was, I was very fortunate. So that's where I started. And I was more fortunate that I had a very open-minded coach whose idea was, go learn as much as you can, train with as many different people as you can.
That's kind of amazing back then, isn't it, Larry? Because people used to be so secular to stay in their own style only and teach that style, right? So that's pretty amazing for a long time ago.
I'll tell you that the best thing I ever heard from my coaches from back then, and they would say it's a funny thing, and I use it to this day as well. And I tell people, when they talk about styles, I said, listen, shut your eyes and I'll punch you in the face, and you tell me whether that's a boxing strike, karate strike, taekwondo strike, kung fu. It's all the same way. If you shut your eyes and I throw you or put a lock on you, it's the same. It doesn't matter what style it is. You can't fake physics, mechanics, good leverage and skills and how to generate power. It's the same. So, more so the coaches are more important, because every style, every martial art, they're all related. There's, there's only certain ways the body moves. So, I was lucky I had that kind of coach that got me to think that way from very early on.
Yeah, amazing. And then you just mentioned you went into Greco-Roman and you went into some of the stand-ups boxing and Thai boxing. And when did you enter the competition, Larry?
When did I what? Sorry, when
start into any competition within the martial arts realm?
When I was a kid, like I was going in judo comps. I was going in jiu-jitsu competitions. Judo were judo rules. They used to have these jiu-jitsu competitions in Australia. This particular group that I was with, and they would be more of they resembled a combination of judo and kyokushin. So you could punch the body, kick the head, knee, elbow, whatever to the body. So that kind of Kyokushin rules, but then on the ground you're allowed to apply locks, strangles, leg locks. So it was kind of an early MMA. So I really enjoyed that because it allowed me to try a bit of everything that I've done. I mean, I competed in kung fu tournaments, kempo tournaments. I competed as many different things as I could because I just wanted to test myself and see if the stuff that I was learning worked.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. So your feeling for competition then is that you think as a martial artist or a combat athlete that you should actually be engaging in competition, and if you want to test yourself, you want to get better.
Yeah, I'm more into traditional, ultra traditional jiu-jitsu. If you look at those styles, if you had the masters from back then around today, I guarantee you they'd be training MMA. They would be doing guns and stuff because they didn't care about how you tied your belt or how you bowed. It was like, will this, save my ass in a street fight? That's, if you look at what real martial arts were about, that's what it was.
What about all the other? Actually, I was interested, Larry. I never really talked to you about it, but do you consider yourself like in that traditional martial arts sense of all the codes and everything, or do you consider yourself more just a combat athlete, combat coach? Like, is it?
Look, I've done a lot of research too, and there's if you read some really interesting books, there's Don Drager, who was an American that stayed in the US after World War II, and he practiced everything from Pencak Silat in Indonesia. He did kung fu styles, karate styles, and he wrote 3 really good books, and they're titled Classical Bujitsu, Classical Budo, and Modern Budo. And it talks about that evolution of martial arts, whether he's using the Japanese narrative, but it could be very similar to Chinese narrative or whatever it is. And basically I think 1800s in Japan, even earlier, martial art styles, you looked at 3 things. First of all, number one was combative technique. That was the number thing. Then you looked at your morals, then you looked at your etiquette. That was part of it. Nobody cared on a battlefield, whether you had morals or not. You had rules of engagement, I suppose, back then. But what happened then when societies get civilized, and Japan did, so to speak, when you look at what classical martial art, Budo is, so that the martial way, it then became about aesthetic, form, morals, and then technique. So it was all about building the person, or making a good society. But they lost a lot of that combative element. So I think a lot of the people that do a lot of cross training now in different styles, what do you call those guys? They're eclectic, or whatever they might call them. They're probably got more warrior spirit. The modern MMA guys, they're more warriors now than what a lot of those old martial artists were.
So they're focused on that side of things, which is the real combative side, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you can't have training for combat without injuries. You can't have it, without a certain amount of blood spilt. If you train a martial art and you never actually spar, never do it, it's always theoretical. You'll never know. So I didn't want to be a theoretical martial artist. I still consider myself a martial artist. I study martial arts, still study and learn to today. I learn a lot from fighting. A lot of the concepts that I've learned from fighting, I'm still learning today, are directly applicable in real life situations.
Yeah. Larry, how long is it that you've been in martial arts? It's 40 plus years, right?
Yeah, so I'm 57. So for 47 years. Yeah.
That's amazing. You look at people that are considered masters and doctors in things after probably 8 years of study, you can be a doctorate of whatever, and you've done 40 plus years. That's here you're talking about the history of martial arts and knowing the technical skills and the overall knowledge you have of the martial arts. You're basically like a grandmaster of martial arts now, Larry. How does it feel to have dedicated your whole sort of life to this? Do you feel like it's a fulfilling sort of life, or what?
Yeah, it's the path I've taken. It's what life has thrown up for me. I could have continued in the path of healthcare. I was studying chiropractic and sciences at uni, and I really enjoyed the martial arts and started competing, and then I never went back to study. I kind of miss that now. I do a lot of read a lot of podcasts. I'm looking at doing some further education. I'm really big into coach education now, which is what I do. Probably because I'm getting older and all the injuries are creeping up on me. But that's kind of the path I'm going down now.
Yep. Larry, jumping back again, Bert and I were interested in the early days of the MMA. You just mentioned a little bit, but how did you jump into MMA? And then further, how did you end up competing overseas in Japan? It's an interesting question.
It's a funny story because, like around about the early 90s, late 80s, we started hearing about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I mean, I was always someone that wanted to go into different martial arts. Someone said, "Oh, have you heard about these Brazilian guys?" And there was a guy who really, I think, gave BJJ a kickstart in Australia, a guy called John Will. And he was doing seminars in Sydney, and I went to a seminar. I really enjoyed it. I was obviously very good at what they were doing. Like I was ahead of most people because I had, the judo, a bit of judo there, and my other jiu-jitsu style. We did a lot of ground fighting with leg locks and stuff, which the judo guys didn't do. So it suited me. And then I opened up a gym in the middle of town. It had to be on Pitt Street. I think you might have come there too, to the Pitt Street gym.
Was that the small one upstairs? Yeah, I was there.
Yeah. And it just so happened to have the monorail, city monorail going past. It was on the third one. The monorail would go past.
I'm going to say a funny story about that, Larry, because it was one of the first week I think I came there. I happened to come upon Alex Cook, and he wanted to do some sparring. And I remember it pretty vividly. So the first thing I did was I did like some sort of push kick or something, and he didn't like it very much. So he came in and just threw some raging hooks and pretty much knocked me out. But you mentioned the monorail. I remember I stood up and I looked out the window and I saw the monorail. And someone else told me that I said, "What am I doing in New York? I have to go to work." Anyway, I had to check my bag to see what was in my bag to work out where I was supposed to be going next. And yes, I was going to work after that. Anyway, back to the gym.
So at that particular gym, our classes would always include stand up, because I was doing Muay Thai back then. We're doing boxing, so we would start the class with stand up with like tie shorts on and t-shirts, and then we'd progress to BJJ, put the gis on and do that. And so one day this Japanese fellow comes to the door and introduces himself in broken English and said, "Can I take some pictures?" Took some pictures. I didn't think anything of it. A little while later, I get a phone call from a guy called Greg Smith, and he says, "Oh, look, I'm here with some talent scouts from Japan." So long story short, this guy that was on the monorail just happened to look at the right moment, saw a bunch of guys punching, kicking, throwing, doing whatever, said, "Geez, that looks like kakutogi," or Japanese, it means, martial arts training. So he's come in, and he was a Japanese reporter from one of the martial arts magazines. And he just went back to Japan, wrote an article about, look, in the middle of the city, and it was a small gym, so it had that probably Japan feel, takeout feel to it. He wrote an article about us. When the Pancrase guys in Japan were looking to get talent from around the world to fight in their tournament, they happened upon this article and said, we should contact these guys and see if they're interested. They basically, one day these guys just knock on the door, and they said, introduced themselves and said, "Oh, look, we're from Pancrase Hybrid Wrestling." Gave us some videos. So have a look at these. Would you be interested in fighting in this? And luckily, we kind of had the courage to say, "Yeah, we'll give it a go." We didn't know what we were getting into. That's amazing. So light years ahead of us. And a lot of people can say, like, okay, were we really the best guys in Australia to be doing that? yeah, it's like anything, it's timing, if you're in the right place at the right time, that guy might not have looked in through that door and nothing
That's
would ever have
amazing.
happened.
I
It's just,
assumed it would have been some sort of connection or contact that got you over. That's amazing that someone just looked in the window and saw you, and that fate took you there. How did it feel to go over there? It must have been exciting as a young fella wanting to fight and going
well,
over and fighting in
yeah,
Japan.
having always wanting to go to Japan, it was the first time I ever went there. I think it was the first time I traveled for amateur jiu-jitsu, like sports jiu-jitsu, which is punch, kick, grapple, like that other style. I was competing in international amateur jiu-jitsu competition,
Yeah,
not the BJJ style. So I always wanted to go to Japan, never had the opportunity. I said, well, here's an opportunity. I'll go fight. Might get my ass handed to me, which I
yeah,
did on numerous occasions. But, best move I ever made, I think, to do
yeah.
that. And like I said, it was a combination of things. We might not have been technically the level, but we definitely had the courage and the desire to do it. And I think that was an important thing.
Yeah, and that's what's valued by the Japanese public and the people organizing as well, right?
And that's what they looked at when we fought. Though we didn't win the first early kind of fights, it was what you showed in the ring, because it was all ring fighting back then. There wasn't any cages, and they appreciated it. Like we were having a go, and it's that Yamato Damashi, that fighting spirit, and no other place but Japan does that so well. So it was daunting. I mean, I remember watching the videos, and
Yeah,
you see Ken Shamrock, and then all of a sudden Bus Rutan kicking and knocking people out, and then
yeah,
we were just thinking, oh geez, what have we done? And I remember part of my motivation to train and run, I remember running on fields just thinking, I'm not going to get knocked out by him. I've got to get better. I'm going to be fighting people like this Shamrock guy, this Rutan
yeah,
guy, and like it was, maybe it was survival instinct, but yeah,
yeah,
it was, for me, unfortunately, like I said, I competed and did stuff. I didn't have the like cookie wanted to kill people. I just wanted to survive, and
mm,
that wouldn't get you far these days. My attitude's very different now, but back then it was just like, let's just do it. Let's see what happens. There was no, I'm going to be the world champion, or whereas these days guys come in and say, I want to be world champ. I want to fight in the UFC. I want to fight, the best in the world and be number one. And that's a great attitude. But back then it wasn't. It was kind of like, oh, well, let's give it a go. Let's try it.
yeah. So Larry, back then you were with sorry, Brent, you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry. I don't want to sidetrack us and go back too far. There's a couple things that you said. I mean, right now you just kind of went into the difference of mentality, which I really want to get back into. But I kind of want to jump back, if we can, a little bit to you said when you were getting started. First, I was kind of curious what the year was to begin with, when you first got started, because it seems so so
The
intuitive.
year when I started doing judo.
All of it, because you talked about judo, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu, and how you were combining all these things. But kind of, when I wouldn't even say mainstream, but my first introduction to mixing things together was obviously the UFC, when a lot of people caught on to it. So I was probably like maybe 9 or 10 years old when I first saw it.
1974 was when I started judo. I actually started Japanese jiu-jitsu, that style, in 19. So it was, what was I was years, and so it would have been around about 82. No, sorry, it was 80. That's right. Yeah, I was 16. So 1980, and I distinctly remember my first competition, a national jiu-jitsu competition, which was basically punch, kick, throw, grapple, was 1982 first Australian championship that I won. So I was 18. So
Wow. Yeah.
82.
So
Yeah.
I mean,
And then
sorry, go ahead.
and then but by that time, we at that jiu-jitsu class back then, it was an amazing class. Like Vince McCann was the coach. I remember there was an ex-boxer there, Bob Bolchie, come in, and he had that real Joe Frazier style, drag that back leg, and really he was a tough guy. He was an ex-bouncer. We had a guy called Joe Falanga that was a karate guy. He'd come in and he was big on Chuck Norris and Joe Louis, and he'd show us all these. So we were cross-training back then, from when I first started. I would say like Nigel Beebe, a judo guy that was there. So it was an amazing school for back then in the early 80s to have all these guys from different styles training there. Yeah, it was just I was just fortunate, you know.
Yeah, that's so it's so different from like the knowledge that I had as a young kid, because I thought that sort of thing didn't exist, until I saw it in the UFC. So it's awesome to hear about all the stuff that was happening far before it was discovered kind of by mainstream, I guess. And
Yeah.
I guess I'm kind of wondering, when you were experiencing all these different variations, so I've been a wrestler most of my life, so I'm very interested in the ground game.
Yeah.
In your experience with judo, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu, at that time, what did you see? What was your introduction to it as the differences and variations to it, and your experience with each of those individually?
Well, judo as a kid, a lot of it was more about the basics of tumbling, falling. I mean, crikey, the guy even had a rope we'd swing off and kick things, and it was more of a fun class. So the judo I did as a kid was really basic, just holding people down and throwing. When I started jiu-jitsu, we would finish. The interesting thing was the jiu-jitsu classes when I first walked in. I think it's probably, I overheard the coach after the first session say something, and he says, "Oh, I think we've got a champion there." And it kind of, I thought, "Oh, they're talking about me." And because we'd finish every class, we call it back to back. You'd sit back to back with someone, coach would clap his hands, and then you go for it. You'd out wrestle each other and try and tap each other out. And you'd go around the class. And I was just probably, I don't know, I was gifted probably because I got terrible eyesight. I wasn't good at hitting people, but I was good at grappling people and had a lot of, good kinesthetic awareness back then. But from an early on, every class would finish with about half an hour ground wrestling. So we do all the other jiu-jitsu stuff, do all our self-defense work and, really good self-defense work. A lot of the stuff that I still teach to this day in self-defense, people look at it and go, "Oh, that's like a wrestling throw." That's, it's just like, traditional jiu-jitsu didn't rely on the holding of the uniform. It was like meant to be with or without uniforms in street situations. So that made a big difference.
So what was your introduction to pure wrestling? Because I imagine a gym where you're doing jiu-jitsu and then you're ending with wrestling, it might not be entirely the same as
It
pure
was
wrestling.
I can't even remember his name. It was at the North Sydney PCYC on Falcon Street. Toby, you might know where it is. But when they talked about these Gracie guys, and they said there was actually some wrestling at uni, and I don't think he was a very good coach, that guy. But then we went and to a police community youth club. They're all over Australia. And there was a wrestling coach there, and that's where we got a little bit more. He started teaching us duck unders and whizzes. I think he was probably more of a collegiate style guy, because when I think of it now, it wasn't. He didn't do too many Russian arm ties or anything. A lot of it was low singles and stuff like that. So and then again, it's always by chance. Someone he said, "I know this Russian barber and his son does wrestling at this club." And Toby's met the guy, and eventually we met Sam Feigelson. Sam Feigelson was what they call an Olympic reserve coach. He was actually the guy that discovered Alexander Karelin. He was in St. Petersburg in one of the sports schools there, and I was so fortunate to have him as my proper wrestling coach, mentor coach, and that was just high level, Russian wrestling. So it's like everything else. It's who you meet. I mean, Sam was still coaching, like Randy Couture is a good friend of mine. And during the 2000 Olympics, Randy came to Australia and stayed at my place for, I forget how long, a month or something, as he was getting ready to fight in Japan. And he was training with Sam, and, like Randy was impressed with him too, because just the level of technique and stuff like that. And the guy back then was, God, 60, 70. So passed away recently, unfortunately, but I think I've just been really fortunate that I've managed to meet the right coaches. I could have gone to some idiot that just said, "Oh, I'm the best," and you don't do it that way. That doesn't, my way works. I've never had a coach that was like that. So
in those experiences, can you identify any major differences that stand out between training when you were doing the jiu-jitsu versus once you got into pure wrestling? Any significant differences with the within the room, or maybe even your mentality with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think Australian wrestling is limited. Yeah, we've got some great wrestlers. We've got a lot of overseas wrestlers now. A lot of people that have come from, Iran, Afghanistan, etc., and they're lifting the level. We had the coach Sam Feigelson coaching us, and you could see the difference between, say, the Australian wrestling, and it was you learn how to defend and scramble much better. That was one thing I remember about wrestling, is it increased my ability to scramble. Yeah, it was, instead of just like, unfortunately with judo, when you go for throw and it doesn't work, you bail. You just go belly down, cover your collars up, and then the referee calls mate, get your back shot, hajime, start again. In wrestling, you have to be active all the time, So that was one of the good things. I think wrestling definitely, people, it's interesting to see jiu-jitsu guys have wrestling matches, and they're good jiu-jitsu guys, and they're totally exhausted after a 6-minute bout. Wrestling is 6 minutes of pure action. You just can't stall. You can't pull guard. You have to keep working. If you stop working, you stop defending, you get points scored on you, and you're finished.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely different. I've wrestled not in judo, but I've wrestled a judo guy coming to wrestling. It was just very different. The position that they win is not. It's not what I would expect. It's a lot of awkward positioning that I'm not used to.
Yeah, they're more upright. Now the rules have changed. They're not even allowed to touch the legs. There's no leg attacks now. Mm-hmm. As in, grabbing legs with your arms, whatever grips you got standing, you got to keep. You can't adjust your grips. They're really different. Really, really different.
Yeah.
So, Larry, jumping back to the early days of your MMA, the wrestling and ground fighting was still at pretty early stages, right? When you went to Japan, I watched a few of the videos back then, and it was still pretty early days. Yeah.
For us, it was. I mean, I was fortunate. The punk rock guys, they're an interesting story because they all came from pro wrestling, but the guys that taught them, they all trained with Carl Gotch. They had the guy Satoru Siyama that went around the world and trained sambo and whatever, all these really good people. Like all those Japanese guys that fought in punk rock, though they did pro wrestling before, they were all hookers. They were able to break something if they wanted to. They were able to rip a leg out, to do some serious damage to you. So going over there, it was a different level to what I was used to, because I'd learned a bit. I had my judo and my Japanese jiu-jitsu background, and I'd learned a bit of BJJ by that stage, but nothing prepared me for the leg lock game or how good they were there, and just they had a game. We were just trying. They were looking for opportunities. We were looking for chances. They were creating opportunities.
And sounds like you're in some pretty interesting company over there. So you mentioned Baz Rutten, you mentioned Randy Couture. What other sort of modern day legends did you deal with over there?
I was fortunate. I think punk rock was a big thing, and then I went to Shudo. During Valetudo Japan Open, Henderson, Couture. We had Tom Erickson. All the Dutch guys. Like I was at a K1 fight. I was in the corner for Sam Greco versus Peter Hertz. Like hanging around with those kind of guys after a K1 event afterwards. Just a who's who of. Probably I hung around with probably about 5 or 6 different UFC champions. Like we were all training. They were fighting back then.
Awesome.
And people that went on to become champions, they weren't champions. Like at that time, Randy wasn't. He became one. Bus became one. But they were the people I knew quite well. Obviously, Ken Shamrock and those guys, Frank Shamrock, and the great thing about that is when I did travel to the States or travel overseas to other countries, I was welcomed with open arms to go and train at those people's gyms. And Bus was teaching at what was it called? A jiu-jitsu club, Hollywood Jiu-Jitsu Club. I can't remember. It was the old Jane Fonda workout studio. And there was Marco Huas, Oleg Takhtarov, all those guys were all training there. It was awesome.
And Larry, when you look at the athletes back then that were, the pioneers, what differences do you see nowadays compared to like the current champions, the current like UFC fighters as an example? What's the main differences in the way they fight and the way they train?
As much as you call us professionals, we weren't professionals. Regardless of what you call Bas and Randy, people were still had daytime jobs teaching, for a living. It's only when the money was there where people could employ strength and conditioning coaches, employ a wrestling coach, a boxing coach. That's when the level really got better. Quite honestly, my level back then, now I wouldn't even rank as a good amateur, but that's with all sports. Sports progress. Obviously, if I had the opportunities that there are now when I was younger, I would have been better, than what I was. But we were the top of the food chain back then, and but that's who was there. Like you can't compare the athletes or the level of competition, because it definitely wasn't the same as now. The guys now are just incredible. You look at Adesanya and just, man, what a stuff.
You're a fan of that sort of technician, aren't you, Larry? I was actually going to ask you if you like Adesanya, because I think we've talked about him, but the technical side of it.
Yeah, it's full circle. It's gone back to the strikers that have got enough grappling in them to stop you from taking them down, scramble back to their feet.
Yeah.
I just don't understand, but also how someone like a Romero, I would have expected Romero to take him down, and Whitaker's good enough. Whitaker's a great talent, and he should have wrestled. And I just, Adesanya must be something else, because those are two good guys that can take a lot of guys down and do some serious damage, and neither of them could keep him down or take him down. It was amazing.
But what about Dan Hooker? Have you watched his fights? He's an amazing technician as well.
Yeah, I think, he is. Did he have the loss just recently?
He just got knocked out by Chandler. But I love watching his style. Yeah, I love the way he's strange.
Mate, pardon me if I can say this, but he brings his balls when he fight that bloke. He holds nothing back. He is courageous. Yeah, just amazing. Yeah.
So on a skill level, what do you think are the main things that have changed over these years, like to what they've become now from your level back then?
Oh, definitely. Look, we were getting by on grappling, taking guys down, controlling on the ground. My judo fights, which were more proper MMA as opposed to my punk rusts, were a kind of mod MMA. The judo fights, though they were a little bit Wild West, because we were punching each other in the back of the head and heels to the kidneys and stuff like that, which are totally illegal now. The level is definitely better now. You just got to look at the top UFC guys and Bellator guys. You got world class wrestlers, better world class wrestlers, sambo athletes. Just the boxing, everything. Much better than what we were, but that's a great thing. That's where it should be. It shouldn't have stayed where it was, and it hasn't. But also, like I keep telling people, if they had enough money, it's like oh God, what's his name? The Irishman,
McGregor.
McGregor. Like, why do people go to boxing? Because of the money. If UFC or if MMA had that kind of money, we get more great athletes transferring over.
Yeah.
As if Mayweather would have made an amazing martial artist if the money was in there. What an athlete, making him doing it. Yeah. It's just, it all comes down to economics in the end, really.
True. Bert, anything?
Yeah. Well, I have too many questions. That's the problem. You just kind of mentioned Pancras and Shuto. Which we want to step back again. I do want to get back to kind of your transition from competing to coaching. I want to get into that a little bit if we can, but before we do that, I'm curious, in your experience from Pancras and Shuto, kind of what was your experience and the difference between them, and just overall, what was your experience like in those?
I was so fortunate that for both styles, I started with Pancras, I think, a year. They started in 93. I started fighting in 94 for them. So, they had just on a year of starting the fight. So we were there from the early stages. It was novel. They knew, look, they treated it, they were professional. They were a great business model. They had a talent pool. They understand they had to look after the talents who put bums on seats. They had a whole production line, how they sold the shows and marketed them. It was a 2-hour show that you come in, watch 7 or 8 fights, buy your T-shirt, buy your magazine, out the door. People were getting paid. We weren't getting paid much, but I don't think anybody was back then. So that was amazing. And then I had an opportunity to go and live in Japan for 4 months and stay in the gym. And that was where I actually got a lot better, because I just gave up. Yeah, I was working doors and had my own security business, and trying to make ends meet with a little bit of money. And I just said, well, that's it. If I'm going to do this, I've got to go to Japan and see, how they train and why they're so good. And I came back, a different person. And that really helped me with Pancras. Then Pancras became a little bit hard because we couldn't get as many fights as we wanted. And plus the rules didn't suit us because there was no weight classes. I remember my first fight, I was 88 kilos and I fought Scott Bezak that weighed in about 120 something. It was just like, it was too much of a weight difference. Amazing. And then, the last guy I bought was, Yanagisawa, Ryushi Yanagisawa, who again would have outweighed me by about, at least 15, 20 kilos. So I got approached by Shudo to fight for them in a weight class. And finally I could fight. My first fight was 82 kilos. And then they bumped it up to 85, which suited me perfectly because I'd cut down from 92 or 93 to 85. So the weight cutting was good. And plus Shudo was allowing clenched fist strikes on the ground, whereas Pancras, you had this agreement, you wouldn't hit anybody on the ground unless it was part of opening up a grappling technique. That's what I said. Shudo was full MMA rules, and that was a big test. And no shin pads, the small gloves. So I was lucky that Shudo had just transitioned to professional. They were amateur up until a year before that. So again, I got in at the right time, and that's when they were putting on Valetudo Japan Open shows. That's where Randy fought Enson Inoue, and you had all those big shows back then. The Who's Who used to fight back then. So it was a good time to be there. And and it was really the networking and contacting of those guys, training with those guys. Like they'd all get to Japan early. We'd be there for a week, in camp, so to speak, to get ready and, partnering people. And, that was an important part of getting better. And then making those connections when I said, can I come to the States and train with you? And I was able to do that. That really helped. So, Toby, did I ever tell you about, I was in Las Vegas and there was a gym called JSEC. John Lewis used to run it. And They asked me if I could help with the guy training, getting ready for a fight. And so I was up against this cage and I said, look, can you press him up against the cage, try and keep him there? And man, this guy was just so good, and taking me off the cage and moving around. He was a great striker. And I thought, man, this guy's good. Anyway, I got some photos with him afterwards, and I look back at those photos.
Yeah.
And I realised it was, you can see the photos now. It's Chuck Liddell. So I was there training with Chuck Liddell. I had no idea. So it was just like, that was funny. It's just like, look at some of the photos. I look at the people in the photos, and it's like, man, it was just, had no idea who I was training with back then.
That's amazing. Amazing history there. Yeah. Brent, did you have any other questions before you go?
I mean, if we've got time, if we could get into a little bit of the transition from competing to coaching, that'd be great.
No,
yeah. So
always,
what was that like? Just that transition, and what you kind of talked about earlier, how the mentality has changed over time. So what was it like adopting that new mentality while you're competing and then transitioning that into your coaching?
I mean, my mentality now is a fighter's, more of a fighter's mentality. So I was very fortunate up until about my, crikey, which fight was, I can't remember. I met a guy called Cameron Quinn. I had a good jiu-jitsu coach, a guy called John Donahue, and that's where I got my BJJ black belt from. And he's an amazing technical jiu-jitsu guy, encyclopedic knowledge. And I got him to corner me for a fight or two. But until I met a guy called Cameron Quinn, who's one of the best Kyokushin guys, like non-Japanese around the world. And he had Gary O'Neill, Ryan at Toby. He had Gary O'Neill, Wally Schnaubert. He actually helped us out on a couple of fights and cornered. Became good friends with him. And he actually was the guy that showed me how to prep for a fight. How to, the mental preparation side. Because I had the other side. I was, doing stuff that nobody else is doing, heart rate monitoring training, lactic threshold training and stuff like that. I just didn't know how to mentally prepare for a fight, or how to handle it, throughout the rounds, mentality wise, to stay focused. And that made a difference. My mentality now, I can pass that on to athletes. It's funny, I wish I had this mentality back then. I would have been, probably more succcessful. Maybe I'd have less brain cells, but more fights.
I remember actually a few of the Cameron Quinn drills. I still actually do some of those drills nowadays.
I still do them today and pass them on as much as I can. He's an amazing person, and just I was so fortunate to meet the right guy at the right time when I needed it. But transitioning to coaching, my mentality, I think for all coaches, for all ex-fighters, like I speak to Anthony Perosh, who made the transition, and people like that who finished fighting. Unfortunately, as a male with testosterone, you tend to want to test yourself. You see a young guy coming in and you think, oh, I've got to show him he's not that good. And one day you just got to say, okay, that's not my job anymore. Like I've just got too many injuries. When people still ask me, oh, can you drill with me? Can you do this with me? And I've just got to politely say, look, I'm too bunged up, I've just had shoulder reconstruction, need a knee clean out at the moment. I'll still train with lighter weight guys, but I've damaged my body training with too many heavyweights. They've done the damage. But one thing I'll always remember, the coach told me, and I pass this on to a lot of people, is when you start coaching, you've definitely got to put the coach's hat on, and don't be competitive, because if you spar your student, if you train with them and you hurt them, or you humiliate them by overpowering and just being too good, they'll hate you for it. But if you go 100% and they get it over you, they won't respect you anymore. That's not your job. So you've got to have that humility as a coach. You got to say, look, I'll help you where I can, but you need. Unfortunately, I don't have too many fighters anymore, because I just don't have I've got a business for general population. When I used to have a lot of fighters, I didn't have, general population coming in, so I didn't have the numbers in the gym. And I just tell people, look, you're welcome to go to other gyms, and it's quite good. I've got one young guy that's really, really good. He goes to other gyms and he's got a good relationship with those guys. He still comes back to me, and I help him as much as I can. But that's what I do. I do that job. But I'm more interested.
Is that just the one gym now, Larry? It's the one gym in King's Cross, is it now?
Yeah, King's Cross, and then I'll just open up a little small satellite PT studio, which which is close to home, so I don't have to travel as far. And I'm just going to have a small one. We tried the big gyms. It was just a mess, and it just cost a lot of money. And luckily, we didn't lose everything. But we've rebuilt now, and things are going better. But the transition from athlete to coach, I was always coaching. I think.
I was going to say that, Larry. I was going to say, I don't think it was a clean transition, because as long as I knew, you're coaching and training people at the same time.
I'm a better coach now, and I can offer more insight into fighting or training than what I used to. One thing we've got to continue doing is coaching. And that's one thing too, is when you're an athlete, you're always training. You're always trying to make yourself stronger, faster, learn new technique. As a coach, you need to spend time every year for personal development, whether it's leadership skills, whether it's, new training techniques, or, unfortunately now we can't travel with COVID and that, but you remember, Toby, I'd frequently go to the States or something. That's when I go and train at Couture's and see how the coaches train there. I go to New York, and as a coach, you've got to spend some time developing yourself, and it costs a bit of money, but it pays off in the end if you just sit back on your laurels and say, I was the number one fighter and whatever. And it's not going to last long.
Yeah, understand. Hey, Bert, we might just do one or two more questions and then let Larry go hit the bed.
That's all right.
All right. I guess just connected to that, what would you say is the straightest, in your opinion, the strongest strength of a coach nowadays versus, and what do you think is your greatest strength as a coach? You mentioned you have a guy that's still coming in and meets with you and other gyms. What would you say is your greatest benefit for him? And then just in general, what is the kind of the strongest suit of a coach in general?
I think I don't know if Toby told you I actually worked with professional rugby league teams. And I've been doing that since 2003, and I'm with one of the premier teams in Australia. Been doing that since 2013, and we're talking about coaches on $1 million contracts and their personal development, the stuff they do. And one thing I've been able to do is implement a lot of the ideas or the philosophies they have as a coach, especially like around personal development. But sitting down, I think, and communicating with the athletes, you've got to get your message across. You've got to do it with the athlete. You can't just say, this is how you do it. I mean, that early stage athletes, it's do as I say, no questions asked. Later on, it's do as I say. We can discuss it, but you still do as I say. Later after that, it's just, okay, what do you want to do? I'll help you there, and let's get it done together. And that's what I do with this one kid. He's off doing stuff, and I say, look, how can I help you? And if he says, what about this situation? I don't know. I just said, look, I have no idea, but I'm not afraid to go to the internet, have a look at fights. It's like analyzing fights, look at new techniques and stuff like that. And there's no one person that knows it all. It's just, yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Thanks. I appreciate you coming on and talking to us and giving me the chance to ask you some questions.
Yeah, anytime.
Yeah, so just to add on to, because the video is going to be made public, just anyone that wants to train with Larry at Boxing Works, interested in any of the arts, stand-up, boxing, kickboxing, Thai boxing, wrestling, BJJ, etc., please check it out. We'll put a link in the description if you want to have a look at the website and check out schedule, etc. Larry and his team of coaches can build you into a superstar. Anyway, Larry, again, just echoing what Brent said, thanks for giving us your time. I know you're a very busy man, and it's great to talk to you, and I hope we can do it again sometime, maybe go into a few other details. Cool.
Yeah, anytime. Like a big insight now from football and what that can bring and stuff like that. So, yeah, obviously.
All right. Thanks a lot, Larry.
All right. Good night, guys.
Cheers, man.
Bye-bye.
Bye.